Religion was never a gift from the heavens. It was a creation of humans, especially those who understood the art of control. When societies first began to form, people discovered a tool far stronger than the sword: invisible fear. Instead of forcing obedience through violence, they built sacred stories, wrathful gods, and divine laws. Through these myths, submission became a virtue, and authority became holy. Faith helped maintain order, but it also locked human minds inside the walls that rulers designed. Religion didn't just tell people how to live, it taught them never to question. From that moment on, God was no longer a symbol of freedom, but a weapon of power. And once power was sanctified, it became untouchable. Religion didn't appear out of nowhere. It was created by people, by those who learned how to turn fear and ignorance into power. When humans didn't understand why thunder struck, crops failed, or disease spread, the so-called knowers, shamans, priests, prophets, declared themselves the messengers of the divine. They claimed that only they could understand God's will, that only they could calm the anger of unseen powers. And just like that, spiritual authority became political authority. Those who claimed to speak for the gods didn't just guide faith, they controlled lives. Over time, they built doctrines, rituals, and hierarchies, all wrapped in sacred language. But underneath it all was a system of control. Religion, then, was never just enlightenment. It was a carefully engineered structure of domination, built on fear and sustained by obedience. Faith, for most people, isn't something they freely chose. It's something they were taught, repeated, and reinforced since childhood. From birth, people are told what to believe, whom to worship, and what questions must never be asked. That's not faith, that's conditioning. Religions have long understood the psychology of control. If you teach someone early that obedience equals virtue and doubt equals sin, you've already shaped how they'll think for life. This system doesn't just demand belief in a God, it demands submission to authority. By turning faith into duty and fear into morality, religion creates a loop where people police their own thoughts. They don't need chains or guards. Their beliefs become the prison walls. Religious scriptures are often portrayed as divine wisdom, messages straight from heaven. But throughout history, these holy texts were written, edited, and controlled by men, not gods. The more sacred the words seemed, the more power they gave to those who claimed to interpret them. In most early religions, only priests or elites could read the sacred language. That meant ordinary people had to depend on them for answers about morality, life, and even salvation. This monopoly on divine knowledge created a perfect hierarchy: God on top, priests beneath him, and everyone else below. By deciding what texts to include, what to hide, and what to forbid, the gatekeepers of faith shaped entire civilizations. It wasn't just about preserving wisdom, it was about preserving control. Because when one group decides what God really said, they decide what everyone else is allowed to think. Religion and politics have always walked hand in hand. When kings, emperors, and rulers wanted to secure their power, they didn't just use armies, they used faith. Religion gave their rule divine legitimacy. Obey the king, people were told, because God chose him. In return, political leaders protected the religious institutions that blessed their authority. Together, they built systems where power was sacred and obedience was moral. Disagreeing with your ruler wasn't just rebellion, it was blasphemy. From the pharaohs of Egypt to medieval popes and modern politicians, religion has been used to shape laws, justify wars, and silence dissent. The cross, the crown, and the sword have always shared the same purpose: to control society and preserve hierarchy. When religion and politics merge, truth becomes secondary. What matters most is maintaining the illusion that power comes from heaven, not from human ambition. Fear has always been the most effective form of control, and religion mastered it. From childhood, people are taught that questioning sacred truths invites punishment, not just in life, but for eternity. Fear of hell, sin, and divine wrath becomes a leash on the human mind. Then comes guilt, the invisible chain. You're told you were born sinful, unworthy, and in debt to a higher power. Every doubt becomes a betrayal, every desire a crime. And the only way to be saved is through obedience. This cycle of fear and guilt creates blind faith, a mindset where people stop asking questions and start surrendering their will. It keeps them small, humble, and dependent on those who claim to speak for God. True spirituality should free the soul, but organized religion often uses fear to imprison it, turning devotion into submission and belief into control. Throughout history, religion has often been used to justify bloodshed. From crusades and jihads to inquisitions and holy wars, countless lives have been taken in the name of divine will. These wars were rarely about faith itself. They were about power, land, and control, wrapped in sacred language to make violence feel righteous. When conquest was profitable, religion blessed it. When empires sought expansion, religion provided the moral cover. Soldiers were told they fought for God, but in truth, they fought for kings, popes, and politicians who wielded faith as a weapon. Even today, extremism and religious nationalism continue this legacy, where killing is seen as devotion and hate is disguised as holiness. But no divine being ever demanded blood. That's not spirituality. That's human greed wearing a halo. Throughout history, religion has often mirrored the power structures of the societies that created it. And that means women and the poor were always at the bottom. Most major religions were written, interpreted, and enforced by men in power. And, unsurprisingly, those divine laws just happened to keep men on top. Women were told to obey, to serve, to stay silent. Their voices were seen as temptations, their ambitions as sins. They were excluded from priesthoods, leadership, and sacred knowledge, not because of divine command, but because empowerment threatened the system built by men. The poor faced a different kind of oppression. They were told that poverty was holy, that their suffering was part of God's plan, and that reward would come only after death. Meanwhile, those preaching humility lived in palaces, draped in gold. Religion became a convenient justification for social inequality, turning injustice into divine order. It sanctified obedience and disguised exploitation as virtue, ensuring the oppressed stayed quiet, faithful, and afraid. When you look at history without the sacred filter, a clear pattern emerges. Religion was not born from divine truth, but from human strategy. It was crafted, edited, and enforced by men who understood that the strongest form of power isn't physical, it's psychological. If you can control what people believe, you can control how they live. Throughout time, religion has promised salvation but delivered obedience. It built empires, justified wars, silenced questions, and crowned rulers in the name of invisible gods. And while it offered comfort to some, it enslaved many more. Through fear, guilt, and blind loyalty. But awareness breaks the spell. When you realize that belief systems are man-made tools, not cosmic truths, the weight of control begins to fade. You no longer need an institution to tell you what's good, what's sacred, or what your life means. Those answers are yours to discover. The end of blind faith isn't the end of meaning. It's the beginning of honest understanding. A world without divine hierarchies doesn't fall apart. It grows wiser, freer, and more compassionate. Because morality, empathy, and purpose don't come from gods above us. They come from the humanity within us.